Good evening, everybody, and welcome to this presentation by the South Asian Symphony Orchestra, which we call Chiragh. In fact, we have named our orchestra Chiragh, and Chiragh, as you all know, is that lamp that illuminates in the darkness. As Pratiti just mentioned in her introduction, the South Asian Symphony Foundation is essentially a trust, a not-for-profit trust that my husband Sudhakar and I registered in Bangalore in July 2018. And the mission and the aim of our trust is to build a South Asian Symphony Orchestra with India at the core, because we're an Indian organization and we are from Bangalore. So most of the activities of the foundation so far have centered upon our efforts to build a database of orchestral musicians who belong to this region. And we took one more step in that regard. We expanded the idea of South Asia to include the diaspora of Indian and South Asian origin, who you know are scattered all over the world. And that is what makes our reach so wide and far today, not just for the orchestra, but for all of us as South Asians. Here, sharing the stage with me today, on my right, we have Alvin Seville Arumugam, who, as you were just told, is the director of the Musicians Initiative, which is an orchestra, one of the leading symphony orchestras of Singapore. This is the first time that we have included Singapore in our definition of South Asia. It has nothing to do with imperial overreach, I can tell you. It's just that we have been scouting for talent, and the orchestra that we are building is South Asian in character, as I said. So we have people of South Asian origin from every part of the world. And Singapore, as you know, is a multicultural, multi-ethnic place, a wonderful place to visit. And it expresses so much of the idea of what Asia should be, this cross-fertilization of cultures, of beliefs, of languages, of food. It's just one of the most Asian of places where you discover the whole world, as it were. And on my left is Arsan Fahim. He's all of 19 years old, and he comes from Kabul in Afghanistan. He's just flown down to be with us for the concert. Arsan is a student at the Afghan National Institute of Music, which is a pioneering institution that was set up by Dr. Ahmed Sarmast. And he's quite well known. He won the Polar Prize, which is, you could call the Music Nobel in some ways, for his efforts to build not only the Afghan Symphony Orchestra, but Zohra, which is an all-female Afghan orchestra, which has toured around the world and won quite a beautiful reputation for themselves. Arsan is a pianist, and he's also a budding conductor. He was born in Pakistan in a refugee camp, and that tells you so much of the situation in that part of the world. Very unstable, very chaotic, very threatened in so many ways when it comes to people leading normal lives. And Arsan returned to his country and to Kabul a few years ago, and he has been with the Afghan National Institute of Music, completing his schooling. He's in grade 12 at the moment, and he's applying to universities, and he wants to study music further. So music, he's going to talk also about how music has been that lifeline, has been that avenue which young people like him have pursued with a great deal of passion and commitment and dedication, despite the fact that, you know, Kabul is threatened almost every day by suicide bombs, by attacks here and there. They've just had an election. We hope for an outcome that will ensure more stability in the country. But the news out of Afghanistan has not been so encouraging as we all know. So we value Arsan's participation. We have a few other members from Afghanistan in the orchestra. The youngest of whom is Ali Sina, who's all of 13 years old. So he's very much the mascot of our orchestra in many ways. So our orchestra is not an orchestra that has a habitation and a place, as it were. We don't have a physical sort of building or a conservatory or a school which houses the orchestra. What we do is we built the orchestra through this search, through burrowing into the innards of the earth, as it were, and built the orchestra which comes together every time they have to perform. We meet about 6 to 7 days in advance and rehearse, and then we present a concert. But through that process of rehearsal, people get to know each other, they build friendships, they talk about their countries, which is why we set up the orchestra. An orchestra, as Daniel Barenboim said once, is a model for society. And why is it so? It's because people rub shoulders with each other. Each and every one has a role to play in the orchestra. Every little note that emanates from every instrument goes to creating this wonderful polyharmony, as it were. And something that, to my mind, is quintessential with the idea of peace and concord and understanding at the human level. So to put it succinctly, this orchestra is more than just a music project. It's a project for peace. It's a journey for peace in our region. And it's our own little way to be saying as citizens that we can make our contribution to promoting better understanding at the human level. So I'm going to ask my two... So Alvin and Arsen and I are going to be in conversation now. We'll have a brief conversation. I will ask them a few questions and they'll speak. And after that's over, we'll have a little time for questions and answers. If those of you in the audience want to ask any of us questions, feel free to do so, and we'll try our best to answer them to your satisfaction. And after that, we will present a small concert, maybe about 25 minutes in all, where we will be playing Rossini's Overture from the Barber of Seville, and Gluck's Dance of the Blessed Spirits, and an item which we call Bollywood Medley, which is a medley of very well-loved Bollywood songs. Am I right, Alvin?
Yes, yes.
Thank you. So, Alvin, let me ask you my first question. What brought you to music and to conducting in the first place?
Well, as with most of us, I started pretty young, back in high school. In Singapore, we call it secondary school. And I was in the school band, and I was just, it was pure luck. I was just walking by, and there was a senior who just pulled me and said, "Hey, come here and sign your name, put your name down on the registry." And being young, I'm just, okay. And that's how it happened, and I started as a percussionist from senior high school, and then in college I became a flute player. I went on to work to be a regular, as you call it, in the Singapore Armed Forces Bands, which is the Armed Forces Bands of the Singapore Armed Forces. And
were you conscripted?
Oh, all the males of male citizens of Singapore who are 18 years and above have to do 2 years of mandatory service. So, but I stayed on. That's why you call it a regular in Singapore. That means you sign on for longer. Mm-hmm. As a matter of fact, we do have one of our musicians here who is a current regular with the Singapore Armed Forces Band.
I see.
So I did my first professional work in the Singapore Armed Forces Bands, and much later on went on to conduct school bands, and then I went to do my masters just maybe about 4 years ago, and eventually. Conducting my own orchestra.
So the tradition of the orchestra, or philharmonic orchestras, symphony orchestras, is quite well established in Singapore. How do you account for that? Because when you come to South Asia and the 8 countries that together constitute our region, there are very few. I mean, you can count on your fingers the numbers of orchestras that we have, symphony orchestras. Of course, we have the Army, Navy, and Air Force bands, but they're a little different. I'm talking of a full-fledged philharmonic orchestra, and Singapore seems to have quite a number of them. And is that accounted for by the fact that you're more westernized in Singapore, or it's just that everybody came to Singapore and it became this huge melting pot of influences?
Well, actually, that's a really interesting question. I mean, Singapore is all of 54 or 55 years old. We are a very young nation. After the British left, we separated from Malaysia and we formed our own government. And in the past 50 or so years, the government has been very successful in policy making, in housing, basic housing, education, and building a very multiracial, meritocratic society. That has been the Singapore dream, if you allow it that way. So one of the policies that the founding Prime Minister had in the younger days, the younger period of his governance, is to have a school band in every secondary school. So this was very interesting. The story goes that because we wanted to have our independence parade, and if you have a parade, you need to have a marching band. And he found out that we had to borrow a marching band because we don't have a marching band in Singapore on our first few years of celebrating our independence. So then there was this idea, a germ of an idea, that in every school there should be a band. And also because in those days, Singapore was really primarily just three races: the Chinese, the Malays, and the Indians. And they used to live in separate kampongs, it's like...
yeah, we know that word here.
Kampongs, okay. So they used to live in separate kampongs. And one way to put all of them together and make sure that the different races and the different cultures and traditions, people mix, is to do them in bands or choirs or whatever performing arts group you have it. And the best way was to do it in school, because at that time they were also making education mandatory. Everybody had to send their kids to school. They get checked on and yeah. So that's how the vibrant Singapore started being very vibrant when it comes to the performing arts. And for a small country over the past 50 years, yes, it has grown. We have really good wind bands. We have really good orchestras. We have two national orchestras, I would call it. One is the Singapore Symphony Orchestra, which is a Western orchestra, and the other one is the Singapore Chinese Orchestra, which is a Chinese orchestra that's made up of traditional Chinese instruments and also cello and basses.
That's fascinating. And when Alvin was talking about the armed forces and his years in the armed forces, I just want also for the audience to know that in our diverse set of musicians that we brought together for the orchestra, we have a serving member of the United States Coast Guard. She is Meera Gudipati, and she is a principal flautist for the orchestra and a musician first class, as they call it, in the United States Coast Guard. So tomorrow at the concert at the Indian Institute of Science, where we are, as you know, we are commemorating the 150th birth anniversary of Mahatma Gandhi, Meera will play in the uniform of the United States Coast Guard.
And if I could add, she is also the soloist for the Gluck.
And she's the soloist for the Gluck piece that we're playing this evening, not in her uniform. And I'm now going to turn to our young friend Arsen. I was introduced to Arsen a little over a year ago. When we set up the foundation, we did a small workshop at the Good Shepherd International School in Udagamandalam, as the purists would call it. And we had a few Afghan boys and girls come from the Afghan National Institute of Music, and we had a few friends from Nepal, from Kathmandu. We had a few violinists, we had some friends from Sri Lanka, musicians too, and they all came together at the Good Shepherd School in Ooty for about a week, played music, made friends with each other, and at the end of which we presented a little concert. So that really was a kind of inception, let us say, of our musical journey. And Arsen was very much a part of it. And to listen to him speak about his experience as a young Afghan, growing up in a very, very turbulent society, situation, country, whatever, however you term it, it was absolutely so moving. And I invited him to be a part of our concert, our presentation this time, because I wanted him to share his story with more people, particularly the citizens of Bengaluru. So Arsen, a warm welcome to you. So wonderful to have you here. Would you like to tell the audience in a few words about yourself and your story and why you do music?
It's a very long story, but just to say it very shortly. I was born in Pakistan, as you mentioned, and I lived there for a very long time. And that's actually something that I'm very sad about, because I would have much preferred to live in my own country. But because of the war, my family had fled to Pakistan before I was even born. That was during the Taliban regime. I was born in 2000. So I was born in a refugee camp, and for a few years I lived at this camp, and then...
Hear you. Speak closer to the mic.
So I lived at a refugee camp, and there was this organization that would come into the refugee camp and just take children in and they would stay at an orphanage and get good education, and they would be taken care of and so on. And
so you actually lived in an orphanage for a
I
few
lived at an orphanage for about 2 years, give or take, and the most important thing is that this orphanage, they sent me to school. They got me a scholarship to study in Pakistan at a really good school, and I went to school. And even after I left the school, I left the orphanage, I still continued studying at the school, and I was studying there until 2012, and that's when my family decided that it's time to move back to Afghanistan and to take part in rebuilding our country. So I had lived in another country for all my life, and I was just going to move to a country that was notorious for its war and violence and so on. So I was naturally very scared, but there was one thing that I was excited about. I knew that SASO, that's the organization, they actually had a learning center in Kabul, and since I was in touch with SASO, I just asked them that once I go to Kabul, can I go to the learning center and study some piano? And they were like, sure, why not? We'd be most happy. So I moved to Kabul, and first thing I could do, I just went to this learning center, and that's when I saw the piano for the first time. And actually, I didn't mention how I got introduced to the piano. There is the movie called The Pianist. I hope most of you have seen it, and if not, I hope you do watch it. I won't tell you what it's about. Instead, if you don't know about it, I'd highly recommend watching it. But just to put it short, a man's life is saved because he's a musician. So since I saw this movie, I just wanted to see a piano with my own eyes. I wasn't sure if I wanted to be a musician, but I just wanted to see it. Like, what is it? And I came into this learning center, and as I entered, I could already hear the sound of the piano, and there was this room. I knew the sound was coming from behind this door, and I was very nervous. I was kind of shy, like, should I go in, should I not go in? I didn't belong there, so I actually just decided that I'm going to go and listen, just see what's happening. And I entered this room, and I saw the piano for the first time, and the lid was open, and the person who would then become my teacher, Milad Yousufi, he was playing a Chopin etude. Of course, at the time, I didn't know that was a Chopin etude. I didn't know any repertoire or anything. So, like, just as I entered and I saw him playing, I was like, this is so cool, I want to learn it. And just that day, I started lessons with him. The first time I saw the piano, he started giving me lessons. And to be honest, I didn't know how difficult music is. I was expecting to become a world-class concert pianist in a few weeks. I decided that I'm going to work harder. I practiced for a few months instead of a few weeks, so that I don't have any competition. I was very wrong. Now I know it might take me my whole life, or actually, that's how music is. Now I know that music is a lifelong journey. It doesn't stop. So I just started, since I didn't have many friends, I was new here, and it was just something very hard for me to move to a new country. I just kind of tried to hide with the music. I used to practice for like 8 hours a day. And I was so shy that I didn't even dare to go out for lunch. When everyone else went to eat, I just stayed and practiced because I was too shy to go and meet people. And that carried on for about 3 months, and then slowly I made some friends, and I got used to the new environment, and actually, that's the time that Milad Yusufi, who was my teacher, he was studying at the Afghanistan National Institute of Music, and he could tell that I really loved music, and he saw my passion for it. So with the help of FSICO, who had other students studying there, and with the help of Milad Yusufi, I went to the institute, and even though it was a bit late, they still accepted me, and now I've been studying there for 7 years, and studying music has just basically completely changed my life, and it's definitely the best thing that has ever happened to me. The most important thing that it's done for me is it's just given a meaning to my life, and I think like I now have a goal in my life. I now have power. I can reach people. I can share my emotions. I can share my thoughts. I can share my ideas, and I just find some kind of comfort in music. I like to say that music for me is like a person, and not just any person, like closer than a best friend, someone who I completely trust, someone who will never judge me, who will always support me and be there for me. And I'm just lucky that I've been studying music. I've had the fortune to study composition, and now I'm also conducting the Afghan National Symphony Orchestra.
Tell me a little about the Afghan National Institute of Music. We all know, I first heard about it when I listened to recordings of Zohra, the all Afghan women orchestra. Considering that what Afghanistan has been going through, and you've seen a lot of religious radicalization and attacks on women, it's really remarkable that out of all that, you have the ANIM, as it's called, has created this women's orchestra, which has toured the world and which exemplifies so much the spirit of independent, emancipated Afghan women. It's a model, I think, for the whole region. Would you like to say a little about Zohra?
I would love to, but instead of Zohra, I would like to say a few words about the school.
Absolutely.
Just a little bit of history about Afghanistan. The country has unfortunately been at war for nearly 40 years now. And all of us Afghans, like those who were born in war, like anyone who was born in the last 40 years, we're just grown so tired of it. But unfortunately, we're still at war. And during 1996 and until up to 2001, the Taliban regime was in power in Afghanistan, and they were just basically Islamic fundamentalists who they actually banned music. And of course, there were many other crimes that they committed, and they still commit. They are responsible for many of the attacks that happen in Kabul and other provinces of Afghanistan. But one of the things they did is completely ban music. And after their collapse, when in 2001, there was still no music school. And unfortunately, when a country is at war for 40 years, and those kind of people or forces are in power, it kind of does affect the mindset of the people, for the good or for the bad. And unfortunately, it's very hard to be a musician in that country, because that thinking of the Taliban, it's still there. And Taliban are in power, and like people who have lived under their regime, like some people are still like that. They still have that fundamental thinking. So to be a musician and to have an institute of music is something very difficult there. Of course, there are threats that the school gets often. Actually, one of the concerts of the school was attacked by the Taliban, a bomb attack, and Dr.
Sarmas was injured.
Yes, and Dr. Ahmad Sarmas, the founder and the director, was injured in this bomb blast. So that's. There were also casualties, the people who were attending the concert. So what I want to say is that by playing music and having this institute, of course, there's women's rights, and Zohra is a wonderful example of that. Zohra it's difficult to explain it, but if you would actually meet these girls that play in Zohra and speak to them and get to know them, get to know their backgrounds. I'm from Afghanistan and I get inspired by them and just the problems they face. Like some of them, their own families don't support them. They get threats, like their own families threaten them that they'd kill them if they study music. That's how far it goes. Yet, they still play music, like they've said no to their family, and that takes a lot of courage to do. And they've said, no, we want to study music. And I think that's just amazing. I'm inspired by them every day, even though I see them every day. And there's also the Afghan National Symphony Orchestra, in a country that even has been through so many civil wars. In that orchestra, people come together, all the students come together regardless of age, nationality, gender, which is a huge problem in Afghanistan, and ethnicity, language. None of that matter. We just come together and we just make music, and like we're just best friends. Like we never think about our differences. We just think about we're all musicians. We're all here to create music. Each of us has a vital role to play in this orchestra, and we want to make music. So that's basically the Afghanistan National Institute.
I'll ask you a question, and then maybe we can turn it over to the audience for some questions and answers. So you brought along some musicians with you on this concert, and it's a wonderful blend. We have people with Indian names, because I know Tarun and Alan and Ishwinder and Sanche Jagadishan. It's all very Indian sounding. And we have a few Singaporean Chinese also in the orchestra. One of the challenges that we faced as an orchestra is that just to find, especially wind and brass musicians, an orchestra has a wind section and a brass section, as you well know. And it's been very difficult to find enough of that in our region. And Singapore to the rescue, as it were, because you brought along these wonderful musicians from Singapore and who are now very much a part of the South Asian Symphony Orchestra, and I hope they will play with us in future concerts. So your orchestras in Singapore are also institutions in which all races come together, is it not?
Yeah, it is. It depends on whether it's a youth orchestra, whether it's an orchestra that belongs to a school or the National Symphony. But there are always a very good representation of the locals, the main races, as it were. And of course, there are foreign talents coming in to apply for jobs. Singapore is a very cosmopolitan city. It's very open. It's at cutting edge technology, commerce is where East meets West. Is a huge melting pot of cultures and traditions. So, as it were, it does attract people from all over the world, and thus musicians from all over the world as well.
Tell me, a country like India, let's say we want to develop adequate capacity in instrumentation, wind instrumentation, brass instruments. What's the best way to go about it? Would you suggest master classes, more music workshops?
Well,
and many of these instruments are horrendously expensive also.
Yeah. I think my wind players will tell you some of their instruments they cost more than like $30,000 or $40,000. More than a car in Singapore. And a car in Singapore is expensive. It's at least $100,000. So, the best case scenario to alleviate this problem in the future is to have a properly constructed conservatory. I recently found out from you that in India there isn't a proper institution.
We have the A.R. Rahman Academy in Chennai, been set up by this world-famous music director, composer A.R. Rahman. You know him. They have they call it a conservatory. I don't know very much about it, but it's been around for 4 to 5 years, and they're building something called the Sunshine Orchestra. So they're building up talent. And of course, the National Center for the Performing Arts in Mumbai, which also runs the Symphony Orchestra of India, they have a little academy where they train young musicians, and they're trying to build up Indian talent in many of these areas. Right? And we have some members of the SOI here. In fact, our orchestra, ladies and gentlemen, is a very interesting mix. As I mentioned, people of South Asian origin, from the region and from the diaspora. And we also have some members, not only from Singapore, but from Kazakhstan. And we have a few of the Kazakh musicians who play in the Symphony Orchestra of India, and one from the Trivandrum Center for the Performing Arts, who've also joined the orchestra this time. So we are a place, I think, where South Asia has met Southeast Asia, has met the diaspora from the United States and some Western countries, and also Central Asia. So it's quite a unique band of people, may I say. But we would obviously have to build talent in the region in these particular instruments.
Yeah, I mean, I've had the big fortune to be here the past 1 week working with wonderful musicians. This week has been really inspiring. I mean, it's been tiring. My orchestra musicians, we gruel every day for the past 5 days. My partner in crime, Farhad, he's just sitting there, my concert master.
Yes, we have a wonderful concert master, Farhad Bilimoria. He's Mumbai born, his family is from Mumbai, and he's lived in Germany for a number of years in the city of Magdeburg, which is very close to Leipzig, and he is a concert master par excellence. Thank you, Farhad, for being here.
So in the past week, working with these musicians of Indian origin, people who have been in India, who have born in India or somehow connected to India, all over the world, with so much talent, it just tells us that actually there's a lot of talent here. Question is, how do we channel the talent? How do we help them? How do we nurture the talent? That's really important. I mean, of course, having an orchestra and having an academy that's attached to an orchestra is great. But I think also having a structured system of study of music would eventually allow us to reap more benefits. But in the meantime, I think masterclasses are great. I've learned much of my study as a conductor, because conducting is a strange skill. You know, very often people come and ask me, "What do you do as a conductor?" It's so difficult to answer that question. I don't know. Sometimes I ask myself, "What do I do as a conductor?" So it's a tough question. And one of the things that I've learned, one of the ways that I've learned to be a conductor is really through masterclasses, learning from the great masters all over the world. I've had a great fortune to fly and meet some of these great maestros and learn from them. And so I think having masterclasses in India, working with the youth, also, and this concert this week with the South Asian Symphony Foundation, I think many people have generously shared their ideas. I have seen even older members of the orchestra asking younger members for the orchestra for advice. I've seen it myself, in conversation, or I've been part of that conversation. And I think that's great, because when you hear people asking for advice, regardless of age or regardless of language, and some of them have language barriers, we are all not great English speakers. I mean, most of the orchestra members speak great English, but we don't use English on a daily basis. But you can hear these conversations going on and people learning from each other. And I have learned so much from the orchestra this 1 week as well. So these kind of events, festivals, and masterclasses would serve as a good substitute for the time being.
Absolutely. So we have a little time for questions. If any of you wish to ask the panel here questions, please feel free. Do introduce yourself.
Hello.
I know who you are, Rita.
Hello, I'm Rita Bhimani. I've come all the way from Calcutta, and it's, we had the singular pleasure of meeting Nirupama Rao in Calcutta, and ever since then it's, we've been hearing about the South Asian Symphony Foundation, and today I just came because I wanted to be here. What I'm curious about is how you're going to take this forward, in the sense that since it is so very diverse, and we were talking about master classes being held, and that's of course a huge step forward, but how will you continue to make more integrated music happen like this, many more concerts, for instance? How are you intending to do that?
Yes, that's true. That's a very relevant question. I always say that, some of the ideas we have may sound very utopian, but this is, I call it practical utopia. And somebody said every map of the world has to have a place called utopia, and we don't have to erase it off the map. Our way of approaching this is, of course, we've started with a series of concerts, just so that the orchestra comes together, rehearses, gets to know each other. So we've built an institution. That's, I think, the first point that we keep in mind, that this is a recognizable, it's there. I mean, you Google it on the internet, you'll see so much of the South Asian Symphony Orchestra today. People across the world know about it. I've had messages from the World Federation of Amateur Orchestras inviting me to speak before them. The Symphony Magazine, which is the magazine of the League of American Orchestras, North American Orchestras, invited me to contribute a full-page article about the South Asian Symphony Orchestra. So our aim, the second point, is to garner greater and greater support and to obtain greater and greater awareness about the initiative that we've undertaken. What is it that has brought us together? What is the mission? What is the spirit behind this? Is it just creating an orchestra? We can all create orchestras, and there are orchestras a dozen that play and then go away, make good music. But there's a larger idea behind this, because South Asia, as we know it, is so partitioned, so divided, so apart from the other, as it were, that we need more connectivity. You know, there is this whole thing about a Chinese Belt and Road initiative. I call this a Belt and Road musical initiative. We are connecting people. We are at the human level making them come together. So what next steps? Well, there's no sleep for the wicked, as they say. In January, coming January, less than about 3 months away, on the 25th of January, we are going to hold a concert of the South Asian Symphony Orchestra at the Partition Museum in Amritsar. And it's very close, as you know, to Wagah border. We don't have any Pakistanis in the orchestra, and thereby hangs a tale. You just have to switch on your nearest television to understand why we don't. I think the process is so driven, amphitheater driven, as I say. There's very little space for policy making in that process. It's as if it's been, it's determined. It's something like, the tale of two cities and ladies knitting before the guillotine. I think it's like that. That's the state of India-Pakistan relations today. So we don't have any Pakistani musicians. There's perhaps not enough talent also there. They haven't pursued orchestral music in Pakistan. Bangladesh, we had one member for the first concert who played the cello, and we had one member from Bhutan. Bhutan also doesn't have musicians who play in symphonic orchestras, but that's why we need to develop talent. We need to give them scope. So what we plan to do is to, as I said, register awareness about this and to get more support. This is entirely a voluntarist kind of project. It's not government funded in any way. We have built this orchestra just through personal savings and through contributions from friends like all of you, as they say. This is totally a citizen-driven initiative. So we hope that circle of friends of the South Asian Symphony Orchestra will grow, and people will want to support this, because without that support, it will not be sustainable. It will not be sustainable. And I hate to think of the fact that we built this and it could be in danger. It could be an endangered species, as it were. I hope that doesn't happen. And we're developing repertoire from the region, most importantly. It's not just classical music that we perform from the West, but we also have our own repertoire. We commissioned 2 original pieces for the first concert in Bombay. One was Humsafar. All of you understand the Indo-Persian, Urdu, Hindustani word Humsafar. And we took 7 songs from 7 of the countries in the region. We only missed out the Maldives because we couldn't find a song at that time to include. And we commissioned a piece called Humsafar, which you will hear tomorrow if you come to the concert at the Indian Institute of Science. And we took a Bollywood song before it was called Bollywood. I think in the 50s it wasn't Bollywood. I say it was Filmistan or whatever you call it. And we took the Shola Jo Bhadke, the song which all of you have heard. And we created a piece for orchestra called Bhadke, and we played it in Mumbai. A very, very nice and unique and very funky kind of piece of music, but suited the orchestra beautifully. And this time in Bangalore tomorrow, because this is an event connected to Gandhiji and his 150th birth anniversary, we commissioned another piece of music, and we have the composer in our midst. Anand, will you please stand up? This is Anand Antonius Nazareth. His father, Daniel, was from Bombay. He was a very renowned conductor in Europe. Unfortunately, he's no more with us. But Anand composed a piece on Gandhi called Ideas of Freedom, which you will hear tomorrow also, a world premiere tomorrow at the concert. So we are building, as I call it, a South Asian songbook, as it were, with music that is quite original and has never been played before, but now can pass into a global repertoire of orchestral music. So another reason why all of you should support it.
Just a short, I have a question. I think you've partly answered it, ma'am. My name is Siddharth Raja. I'm one of the governors on the board of the Bangalore International Center. Maybe this is an opportunity for you to let us know a little bit more about how people like us in Bangalore could become friends of the orchestra, and you know what that might entail, because it's always good to support. And that was my question, to ask what and how do we go about that and what it involves. And my request, if I could call it that, is a request which has lasted for many years. It's a personal little story that my introduction to Western classical music was when I stole an old cassette from my dad, not knowing what it was, and popped it into the cassette player and it turned out to be Tchaikovsky's Capriccio Italian, right? And a piece where I've actually traveled once all the way into Hong Kong to listen to the Russian State Symphony Orchestra perform it. I'm just hoping that you will, at one point in time, we'll perform that piece. Thank you.
Well, the first part, sorry, I didn't get the first part of your question.
But how we become friends of the...
Yeah, how do you become friends of the South Asian Symphony Foundation? Well, you can, of course, ask to be informed of all the events that we hold. That's one level of friendship. You can be part of our mailing list so that we can keep you posted of what we do. The other way is to make a one-time contribution to the foundation for a workshop or for bringing down some musicians for a master class and then a concert. And the other, of course, is to support it every year for a few years so that, we find our feet, and then at one point we are more self-sustaining than we are today. But the orchestra definitely needs your support. It's not that this is not meant to be a fundraiser at all, I can assure you. But your support counts very much, because this is a unique project for the region. People compare it with the East-Western Divan Orchestra, which was set up between Israel and Palestine by Daniel Barenboim and the late Edward Said. Yes, in a way you could say the ethos is similar. But our region, I think, our region of South Asia is far more complex than even the Israel-Palestine problem, I think, in many ways, because we have issues of development, we have issues of connectivity, we have issues of prejudice that is just a hangover from the past, we have religious radicalism, we have many problems, not just territorial disputes, it goes far beyond that. So at the human level, why can't we be different? That is really, I may seem like I'm howling at the moon, but I will continue to howl at the moon on this. Any other? So if we're all set with the questions, I think we will get off the stage, and it's time for the music. Thank you.